Hello and welcome to our Summer Scares middle grade panel. I'm Julia Smith, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to Summer Scares resources and information about the program were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download them by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble, please contact Booklist at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a selection for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, please look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of them at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. We'd like to start today's webinar with a brief introduction about the Summer Scares program. For those of you unfamiliar, the Summer Scares reading list includes titles selected by a panel of authors and librarians and is designed to promote horror as a great reading option for all ages and during any time of the year. The program is designed by the Horror Writers Association in partnership with iREAD, Book Riot, NoveList, and Booklist. As I mentioned earlier, we sent a link to the Summer Scares program guide for 2025 in the reminder email, but please feel free to ask for that in the Q&A box if you are unable to locate it, and we'll be happy to share it with you. Let's get to the reason why we're here today, our wonderful panel. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Graham Annable, author of Eerie Tales from the School of Screams from First Second, Derrick Chow, author of Ravenous Things from Disney Hyperion, and Daka Hermon, author of Hide and Seeker from Scholastic Press. We will hear a brief presentation from each author about their book and then move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We will start with Graham Annable, author of Eerie Tales from the School of Screams. Graham, could you please tell us a little about your book?
Sure. My book is actually a graphic novel, and it takes place in a classroom where the teacher, Miss Nomed, demands that each of her students tell the scariest, eeriest story they can tell to the class. And the book is kind of comprised of 5 short stories that each different student tells. And I thought I can't really sort of read a passage from a graphic novel. I've learned that it's much better to show some of the panels. So I thought maybe I'd just take you quickly through one of the shorter stories in the book as a little slideshow. So let me just share my screen. And get this set up. So this story is called The Ghastly Ghost Chase. And one student standing in front of the class starts to tell it. And as he tells it, we see it. Wow, a real drone. Sick. I just got it. Here we go. The drone starts to fly up into the air, but the one kid looks over and he's like, hey, ghost! And there's a ghost sitting over in the forest. And the ghost does a little wave. And the kids all scream. They all run. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. A ghost, a real ghost. What are we gonna do? 911? You can't, geez, you can't arrest ghosts. This is nuts. Are we cursed now? Think, think. Do you think it's still there? I don't know. You look. I don't want to be cursed. You look. We should see if it's still there. Then go ahead and see. Undead forever. And then they hear the drone. And they look, and it's the ghost playing with the drone. And he flies it around and spush into a tree. Hey! Ghost looks a little worried, throws away the controller, and takes off. He's running away. He's scared of us. Get him! And they start to chase the ghost. Ghost comes flying through somebody's yard. That drone was brand new. Kids are chasing. Goes through a bunch of laundry. The kids all get tangled up into it. The dog sees them and starts to bark. Grabs the towels, trips the kids. And then they look. They see the ghost is still there watching. Dog takes after the ghost. Bark, bark, bark. Sick 'em, boy. Yeah. Bark, bark, bark. Kids are chasing, chasing. And then it's like, wait a minute. Big junkyard. Where did he go? They start to look. Where'd that dog go? I don't know. Here, boy. Woo! The dog is inside of a van. The old van is totally locked. What the heck? Is the ghost in there too? I don't see him. There. The ghost is over in a field. Come back here. And they chase after him. Goes down through a big sewer grate or sewer tunnel or under a bridge, sorry. Chase him to the other side. Bunch of crows all caw, caw, fly away. Now where'd he go? Thunk. He gets hit with a rock. He's throwing rocks. Ow. Throws another rock. That really hurt. Ghost is throwing stones at them. Eat stone, ghost. And they throw back. And it goes right through the ghost, of course. But he doesn't like it. Into the woods. Or into the field, sorry. Ha ha. You little scaredy ghost. And the kids are starting to catch up. Got you. Reaches for him. Boom. Goes right through him. Keep going. He felt so cold. Don't lose sight of him. And I get chasing into the woods. And deeper, deeper into the woods. We'll get him. Over some rocks, around some logs, through the trees, and into, or sorry, they get really, really close. He reaches for the ghost, and then the ghost grabs him. Hey, wait, whoa. And he drags the kids into an old house in the middle of the woods. Things go dark. And then someone puts down a little toy airplane. And it's a couple of different kids. Hey, ghosts! And that is the end of that short story. So
Thank
the book has a lot of certainly scares to it, but I hope a level of humor throughout as well, just to give you a taste of it.
thank you so much, Graham.
Sure.
Um, yes, so now we will hear from Derrick Chow, author of Ravenous Things. Derrick, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Gladly. My book, Ravenous Things, is a very creepy, very twisted reimagining of the Pied Piper tale. It's about 12-year-old Reggie Wong, who is mad at everyone and everything in the world because his dad passed away a year before. But then one day, Reggie is on the subway platform and he encounters a strange man with a flute. This man, who calls himself the conductor, promises Reggie that he can reunite him with his father. And so Reggie follows the man onto his midnight subway train, along with hundreds of other children who are also grieving lost loved ones. The train winds deep into the wild, uncharted tunnels beneath the city, where Reggie and his three unlikely new friends must encounter a maliciously malign magical plot to take over the world. And his friends also have to grapple with the complicated feelings of grief that they're all struggling through. I'm going to read you just a short passage from my book that features a magical transformation, because mischievously magical transformations are a important part of my novel and feature a lot in the plot. Reggie squinted into the gloom at the congregation of rats, and a small yelp escaped him. Even through the shifting shadows, it was clear that something bizarre was happening to them. They were changing, growing. In the blink of an eye, tiny rat paws were shooting up and out into long, thin limbs. Dark fur melted away to reveal skin as smooth as frog bellies, and narrow, ratty heads were ballooning out, becoming rounder, more human. As the conductor's tune grew more frantic, it became painful to hear. Reggie clutched his ears, as did Gareth and Chantal. They fell to their knees as the horrible tune filled their heads and burrowed right inside their brains. Tears leaked from Reggie's eyes, and he shook his head to rid himself of the flute song. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The sudden silence was like being dropped from a great height. The lanterns above stopped guttering, and the leaping shadows went still. Reggie lowered his hands from his ears and looked up. The conductor stood with his arms poised in the air, his motionless fingers keeping the flute aloft. A tendril of blonde hair escaped his cap, falling over his right eye, and a satisfied grin stretched across his face. Shockingly, there were no rats in sight, only children, hundreds of them, gathered around the conductor and his wooden flute. Pale and dirty, the children looked like odd potatoes that had just been dug up from the earth and exposed to the sun for the first time. They let out strangled sounds of awe as they examined their new limbs. So there's just a taste of my book.
Ooh, thank you for that. You were correct. Nice and creepy. That's how we like it around here. All right, Daka Hermon, you are here to tell us about Hide and Seeker. So if you would turn on your camera and share a little about your book.
Hi, so I'm the author of Hide and Seeker, and this is sort of my creepy take on the game Hide and Seek. And it also deals with grief, loss, and overcoming your fears. And in Hide and Seeker, a group of kids attend the welcome home party for their friend Z, who mysteriously disappeared a year ago, and he's returned not quite right. And at his party, as they're waiting for him to come in for the party, they decide to play a game of hide and seek, and that sets off a horrible chain of events, and that's where everything goes wrong. And so I'm going to share a little passage from the book for when they start to play the game. So let's see. And this is one of the main characters, Justin, who is starting the game for everyone else to go and hide. I give everyone a moment to strategize as I walk over to the lonely oak tree standing between the sagging back porch and the snack tables. Its limbs droop from heat exhaustion. I slide my hat around so its brim is facing the back, close my eyes, and rest my head on my folded arms. The rough bark makes a small imprint in my skin. A bee buzzes around my head, and the sound matches the odd static that fills my ears. I mentally shake myself and focus on the game. I went up the hill was muddy, stomped my toe and made it bloody. Should I wash it? I yell. Yes, the players shout from different locations as they search for hiding places. The hot wind pants through the trees and dead leaves shower down upon me. I went up the hill was muddy, stomped my toe and made it bloody. Should I wash it? Yes. I recognize Carla and Lyric's voices. They're still searching for hiding spots. I went up the hill was muddy, stomped my toe and made it bloody. Should I wash it? The backyard is eerily silent. It's holding its breath. No responses. They're ready. I lift my head and slowly turn around. Brown, brittle grass and wild weeds peekaboo out of the thirsty ground. Candy and ice cream wrappers chase each other like tumbleweeds. The hunt begins. And then from that point on, things go horribly wrong for all the kids playing the game. And that's hide and seeker.
Thank you so much, Daka. All right, it's time for our panel. Authors, will you please turn on your cameras, turn on your mics, and we will start talking. Welcome. I love having you all here. All right. Loved the sharing, and that sort of does a nice job of demonstrating like one of the goals of summer scares is to show that horror can have like a lot of different flavors, and we want to give everyone a taste, and it can be different age ranges, different levels of scares. Graham, you definitely nail the humor in yours, which I love. It reminds me of those like Simpsons Treehouse of Terror episodes. But let's dive in with just like horror in general. How did you become a fan of that? Was this something you all were reading as children or watching? Yeah, love to hear more, your origin stories. Let's
Who should start?
Graham.
Graham?
Oh, did I? Oh, okay.
Me?
Yes, Daka, please.
Okay, you go first.
Oh, well, I have to say I'm the biggest scaredy cat. I did not set out to write horror. In fact, it was something I was like, are you sure I'm doing that? I thought I was writing an action adventure because growing up, I didn't typically read horror. I was more into comic books and, watching animation superheroes and all of that. But I started writing hide and seeker, and the more people who read it said I was writing horror. And I was like, are you sure about this? Because I don't think I am. But they're like, no, it's really creepy and scary. And so I just kind of went with it and tapped into all my fears as I was writing the book. And so that's probably what you see on the page. But yeah, growing up, I only read or like watched something that was scary if my friends were watching it and I didn't want to feel left out. I wanted to be able to talk about it with them. But yeah, to this day, I'm afraid of my own shadow pretty much. So I'm surprised when I write these things.
That's great.
I was gonna say almost the same thing, Daka, in that I'm a total scaredy cat. I don't know why I've ended up in this position of doing horror in a way, but it did start, I guess, a little earlier for me. Like I think when I was 11-ish, yeah. Group of friends. At the time, I guess we had a book club, but we didn't know it was a book club. But there was one friend of mine in particular, Scott, who kind of just always led our group down these weird paths of like, okay, I'm reading this book, and I expect all the rest of you guys to read this book as well. Because, like you were just saying too, the sharing part is what's cool about it. And it's what's great about book clubs in general. But um, anyway, so we read, I don't even remember the other books. We read a few different books, and then at a certain point, he chose Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And I was like, I'm not reading that. No way. Like just one look at that cover. At that time, the cover was like this sort of dark statue with a bit of blood dripping from its mouth. It was just like the scariest thing. But everybody else started reading it, and it was honestly peer pressure. I just sort of caved because I was like, well, I guess I should try it. And that book, I had never read a book faster than that one. Like I got so into it, and that was it. That was like the tipping point where I was like, oh, I guess I do like horror stuff because it's the whole thrill of it. And Stephen King just made stuff super easy to read. And maybe shouldn't have been reading it at the age of 11 or 12, but I did. And yeah, that just took me down that path. But I've never not still been scared. Like I have a hard time. I really carefully choose which like horror movies or horror books I read because it's just like there's certain stuff I just can't tolerate, and there's certain things like I just I don't know. I need to know what I'm getting into before I get into it.
Yeah, for me, I always sought out horror as a kid since I can remember. Any sort of horror movie or horror TV show. Some of the early books that I really loved that were age appropriate. House with the Clock in the Walls. Um, lots of goosebumps, and like Graham was saying, Stephen King, I read it probably when I was too young. Misery was my first
Oh.
adult horror novel, and I was like 12. I think for me, the reason why I sought out horror so much as a child was I was always very fantasy minded, and I was always interested in things that were either paranormal or fantastical or not quite real, or perhaps I hoped was real. And horror is a realm where anything is possible. And I think even though a lot of adults think, well, therefore it's not appropriate for children because it's too scary, but I think it's a wonderful genre to play around with imagination as a reader. And you're not judged for believing in a scary haunted doll or a ghost or a hide and go seek game that goes wrong, like in your book. So I think for children, it's a great playground to explore ideas outside of the box. So I think that's what drew me to it as a kid.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Stephen King was the gateway for many a very young reader. And it always makes me laugh. And there just weren't the options that we have today. And that's one of the great things about this program is that we get books like yours that are a little more suitable for a middle grade audience. And so, but it always makes me laugh when everyone like sneaks that Stephen King book off their bookshelf and is just like sold from that point on. So, let me see. Well, one of the things about your books that sort of stood out to me, they all have very, very distinct settings. And I was kind of curious about like the world building or like creation of those settings and like where some of your original ideas came from, the genesis for your stories. So here, I'm going to pick on you, Derrick. You have both a fascinating setting, and I was very interested in like, what about Pied Piper? Like, what about that story? Where you're like, that's the one that I'm going to go with.
Yeah, for the setting, which largely takes place in the subway systems of Toronto, and also the fictional underground realm that I'm envisioning is kind of deep in the subway tunnels. I think I like that setting because it's so banal. It's a location that many people in the city visit every day, and most people don't want to be spending time there. You want to get in and get out, and I think. Um, for me, taking something that's quite normal, they interact with every day, and then turning it on its head, there's a lot of possibilities there for a writer, and a lot of ideas for something going wrong and being terrifying. I think it's more terrifying when it's rooted in something relatable. Um, I think for when you talk about the Pied Piper. I've always found him a really fascinating figure. Even when I was a kid and I would read the first like picture book versions of the story, I was always struck by how like sad and also just terrifying it was because it's essentially a story that ends on a man like kidnapping an entire village worth of children. And as a child, I was always fascinated with what happened after the story ended because the children get all led away. And some versions it's like they go into a gap in the mountain or off to some fairyland, and we never quite know what happens to them. And as a child, I was always really disturbed by that, but also curious. I wanted to know where they ended up, which is largely what you find out in my book. So yeah.
Very good. Daka, putting you up next. Also, you have a great setting. You have a great mechanism with the hide and seek game, which is like such a touch point for pretty much every kid out there. But like where did the spark for that idea come from?
It came from, I was visiting home in Tennessee, and that's where a lot of I'm in LA now, but I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And some of my best memories were playing outdoor games with my friends and my family. And for hide and seek, that chant that I just, read, that was the chant we used to start the game. And to this day, no one knows where it came from. It's so weird and creepy. We only said it on this one street in my grandmother's neighborhood. And we're like, I went up the hill, like who originated that and why? And that just started me thinking about the game itself and how you're really hunting kids for sport. Like, and what if a kid disappeared and you didn't find them? Like, and where would they be taken and what would be happening to them? And I'm like, we play some really, scary games if you thought about it. And so that sort of gave me the inspiration for the book. And then when the kids get taken to to nowhere where it's like a world of fears, I was just, thinking about all the fears we have as kids. And what if not only you take on your fear, but the fears of all those around them? And what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for the people you're with? And how can you kind of like join together to overcome these big fears? And I think I mentioned that I was a big, comic and superhero fan, really into Marvel, really into superheroes. And I like the idea of kids being their own superheroes. Like you don't have to have powers to overcome things. You each individually have something special and you can use that to overcome like, this great big bad or some evil in the world. And so I just kind of, all those things were sort of rattling around in my head. And that sort of became the idea for hide and seeker.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I love the idea of you don't actually have to have powers, like out of this world powers to defeat something. But you also have such I don't know, I felt like there was a very strong urban legend sort of vibe to yours, which I loved. Um, and did you think about that? Were you like one of the kids who was sort of taken in by some of the urban legends? I know I always adored any of the ones I came across.
You know what? And again, with this book, since I didn't set it out to be horror and it just
Mhm.
kind of fell into that, I didn't realize it. I don't know sometimes what the books are about until I at least have a first draft. So everything, all the fears, all of that stuff was not in the original first draft of the book. It just sort of evolved into all of this stuff and became an urban legend. And I always think sometimes that these books are my therapy. I'm working out things from my childhood or things that I experienced, like grief and loss, and I become one of the main characters in the book. And so the urban legend part of it, I guess I can see that now, but when I set out to write it, had no idea what I was doing.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna come back to the whole fears, grief, loss part in a bit.
Okay.
Because Derrick, you have a lot on that as well. But I do want to hear from Graham about your stories and sort of the overarching, like the framework, I guess, is the best way, like in the classroom for yours. Like, where did this come from?
Well, the framework definitely came very late in the whole thing. Much like Daka was saying, when I do these stories, I honestly don't know what I'm doing. I'm just following my nose. I'm trying to find things that are interesting to me. Because I've found in the past, I don't know for you two, but when I come into a project or a story with too much structure, too many things that I'm thinking I'm going to do, boy, does it go wrong. Never get there. So, and for me, I come from an animation background and comics and visual. So a lot of my stuff starts with doodles, little doodles. I think each of these of the 5 stories in there, minus the framework story, all came originally just from drawings of situations that I thought were cool or interesting, or I really wanted to figure it out. Like the whole idea of those fish people tearing down that village. That's all I had. I just knew I wanted that image. I wanted to figure out a way to have an excuse to draw that. and make that work. And so a lot of times I will work backwards from those things where I've got sort of visual key images that I really want to make sure I justify having. And that's a lot of the way my weird method ends up working. And so this book was something that I chipped away at for years, and I really just did these little horror stories and thumbnails on the side for myself. I didn't know that I was actually making a middle grade horror graphic novel at any point. But when I had 5 of the stories together, I presented them through my agent to the publisher, and I thought I thought I was writing actually horror for adults, really edgy, like unbelievable stuff. And they all came back and said, "This is perfect for middle grade." And I was like, "Oh, I guess you're right. I guess my level of extreme horror is always going to be at the age of 12." That's where I guess thrive for telling stories. And so, but it was at that point that they were like, "This is great, but you should try to figure out a way to connect all these 5 stories." And man, I sat for a while with that one, thinking it over, and then yeah, the idea of a classroom and a teacher who's making these children tell these horrific stories was like, oh, okay, this suddenly elevated everything and got me more excited than I'd ever thought I could be already about the 5 stories to frame them within that. So I'm glad you're interested in that framework story because yeah, it kind of came in late.
It worked so well. And like just on its own, that's sort of a horrifying situation for a lot of students. I think just having to get up and do like a
That
presentation.
was honestly, that was my biggest fear as a kid. I absolutely just was terrified of the oral presentations. Like,
Yeah, yeah, me
not
too.
where I wanted to be in front of the class.
Mm-mm. So just like that that base fear, it's sort of there and ready, and extrapolating upon that in such a fantastic way worked really, really well.
Thanks.
So, oh, that's all great. But yeah, I wanna we've skirted around it, but I do want to hear what you all have to say about like having these are for kids, like these stories, why have stories like this for kids? And there will be adults out there who are, looking out and be like, I don't know. I don't want to like scare a child or something. And what would you say about that? And where do these fit? Uh,
Well, I think what Derek said earlier about the fantastical element of horror stories is what's kind of amazing about them. And I think beyond a fantasy story, they're a little extra supercharged because there's an edge to it. There's a consequence to a lot of things usually in horror stories, so it's scary. But I don't know, from my own experience as a kid reading them, like it's kind of the safest way to face some fears, like you can be in a safe place reading this thing and you can test your sort of self out going through these experiences that you read. And boy, I think again, also thinking back to that sort of book club, not book club that we had, like the horror stuff was the things that were the stories that everybody was the most excited to share. And because it was kind of like we all got to ride a wicked roller coaster and then talk about it, like that just, I guess the highs and the lows of a horror story typically just get higher and lower than most other genres. And I think it just, yeah, they scare you. So, but in a safe way.
Yeah, I think horror stories for children can give them a sense of power. It really, as Graham was just saying, is a safe way for them to explore the idea of um, something terrifying and something that is a great threat to children, but to see child characters overcome that and to overcome the villain or the monster, whoever it might be. I think there's just a great sense of um, power and a child feeling like they have within themselves the tools it takes to overcome whatever challenges might be in their life, which is why I think it also sounds like in Daka's story, grief is also an important theme in it, as in mine, because that is also something a lot of children have to overcome, and horror is a good space to explore that.
And I have to say, like Derek and Graham kind of summed it up. It's the same thing of like having safe, controlled fear, basically. Because they can always close the book and walk away if it's too much. I've heard someone else describe it as like bite-sized fear. It's like
Mm.
overall, there's so many things going on in the world that, kids don't have control over, that they're afraid of, but horror sort of introduces it to them in like smaller bite-sized pieces where then they can actually have control, they can overcome, maybe they see similar situations that are happening in their lives, and seeing a character that is able to deal with it in a particular way or able to overcome it, like empowers them to believe that I can overcome this as well, I can handle these things. And a lot of kids tell me that it's thrilling, it is an adrenaline rush. It's like you said, being on a roller coaster, and actually reading it with their friends. Like there's like this community that they form, and they really, really enjoy it. I was like, that wasn't me, but I understand that they have that and they seek after that. So I think that is what, and usually, within a horror story, there are other important themes that we're tackling as well. And horror is just sort of the background of everything else that's going on.
Definitely. But about the community aspect, you said it wasn't you, but you were like there were friends watching movies and you would like have friends with you. And I feel like that is part of it. And that's sort of the book club idea is you've got friends with you while
Yes.
you're like going for it. And I
Put your
do,
hand through it.
yes, yes. So it's a very much a shared experience and a just like all in it together sort of mentality that is kind of unique to horror. Um, but we have trying to think. I had a note. I guess kind of fleshing out a little bit more about some of these more real world concerns or themes within horror and how, because I mean, they are properly scary in their own right. So, it doesn't have to be a big moment of terror. It doesn't have to be a literal monster coming out at you. But like the loss of an important person in your life is a huge thing, or just like disruptions in the world around you, a fire in California. Like there's a lot happening right now. And I think it can leave people feeling very uneasy, whether they are adults or children. And children are very attuned. Um, so how would you talk about any of these like external pressures or like personal losses that characters experienced in your book and how maybe a reader could see them dealing with things or like find strength then or comfort in their own lives with what your characters were going through?
Um, well, as I said in my novel, I have a whole bunch of characters dealing with grief, and for me, that started from a very personal place. I came up with the idea of the story because I was grieving the death of my own father, and I think in going through that process of grieving myself, I realized that one of the things that I kind of obsessed about was the idea of spending one last day with my father, which is kind of what my protagonist gets, but in a very twisted, creepy form that he doesn't expect. And I think what I want the takeaway for readers to be is how Reggie and his new friends that he makes, how they're able to come to a place where they accept grief will always have space in their lives, but they start to learn how to open up their lives to things other than grief because they're kind of stuck in that moment of being very much consumed by it. And I think for them, it's the unlikely community they form because they're essentially these three kids who've been kidnapped by an evil villain, and they have to band together in order to get out of this deadly situation. But they also, in doing that, start to open up to each other and talk about their feelings. And it's kind of clear they're only really comfortable doing this with each other, even though they're essentially strangers, because they recognize the other child is also going through grief. So I think that's one of the most powerful, I hope, messages in my book. Just the sense of community you can get from opening up and sharing with people with your own shared experience, no matter how traumatic, that it will help you lift you out of the situation. That's my hope.
And I think for me, like in my book too, there's grief, a character dealing with the loss of his mom from cancer. And sometimes grief can feel like, you know, you're all sort of all alone in that. And that you're afraid to like share your feelings, and you're afraid to like be angry and to show that anger. And so I think within hide and seeker, you know, one character is dealing with that, but the other characters are dealing with their own personal fears that they have, and the fact that they all have to come together and say their fears out loud to each other. So they sort of form this community of together we can overcome everything. It doesn't have to be a personal thing that you have to deal with yourself. You have these friends around you who care about you, who want to take on this sadness that you have and uplift you and encourage you. And so I kind of wanted kids to see that they're not alone in these times. Like they have other people there to support them, and that they can go through it. And there's not always you know, at the end of the book, you're all better. No, grief is something that stays with you, you know, for a long time, but you know that you have people around you to support you, and it's okay to have these feelings that you have. There's nothing wrong with feeling like anger or bitterness or loss. This is just a part of just life in general. And I just kind of want them to have that takeaway of your feelings are valid and they're important, and it's okay to express them in any way you need to get through the pain that you're feeling. So I guess I think that was the takeaway from hide and seeker.
Thank you.
My book didn't really necessarily deal with grief per se, but I was listening to Derrick and Daka, I think like I guess overall the feeling tension in my book throughout is the sort of impending dread. There's a sense of like things are just going to be getting worse and worse as it goes. And not the same, but I guess similar to grief in terms of a message for kids reading it. Like the fact that Emily and Davis, the brother and sister in it, despite the situation they're in, they stick together and they've formulated, I don't want to give too much away, but they've formulated a plan, and they, you know, are doing their utmost through this horrible situation to essentially save the whole class of kids from the predicament they find themselves in. So I think, you know, yeah, it's that sense of persevering and sticking together through the tougher times, I suppose, is part of the message that kind of comes through in mine.
It does. It does. And they take control of a crazy situation. Uh, and that's important to see too. Like it can be done gently and with a lot of heart, and it can be funny and like over the top. And I think that's going to hit home with different readers in different ways, and it's important that like all of them have an option out there where that resonates with them or strikes a chord. And I think you all have something like unique to offer on that front in your books that I really appreciate. Um, let's shift just a little bit to talk about libraries, since we are part of the American Library Association here. Were you guys like library kids when you were growing up, or like I was always at the library with like my giant tote bag of all the books I could carry. Um, do you have any like what do they mean to you?
Oh, go ahead, Graham.
Oh, I'm just thinking out aloud. When I think of libraries, I always go right back to the very first librarian I had at our public school growing up, Mrs. Kirkland, and she was just so good at reading stories aloud. Like those early grades, I just remember like that definitely had a when I look back on it, that definitely was a big factor in me just being interested in books from the get-go. Because she just was so good at bringing stories to life that she would read to her class, and I would definitely go to the public library in the city. I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, up north. But I spent so much time in the school library. I just was always in there. Like recess time, they would allow us sometimes to just hang out in the library. That's where I would be. So yeah, those are definitely, yeah, huge factors, librarians.
And I have to say, like, can't tell, but I'm sort of an introvert. So libraries were my safe place. And like public library and school library. For the public library, I remember I'm old enough to remember where my mom could just drop me off and I would just stay there on Saturdays, just, reading until she came to pick me up. And in school, when I felt like, I couldn't communicate well with my other students or whatever, books were my safe place. These characters became my friends. I could disappear into these fantasy worlds and just sit there and just read. And then having the librarians like introduce me to books that I wasn't reading, because again, I wasn't at that time reading horror. So they would introduce me to new books that I could read. And I just felt like safe and happy in those places. And I think that's why I still to this day have a love of physical books, like being able to touch the book and turn the pages and like, highlight and dog ear like pages, like holding the book. It's just this, I don't know, it's just this strong memory of even this the smell of libraries, the dust of the libraries. I don't know. It's just a comforting place and feeling for me. So yeah, libraries are kind of got me through like some tough, hard times as a kid, I think. So they're very special to me.
Yeah, what Daka just said about libraries being a safe space pretty much exactly describes my childhood experience with them. It really does make me think of there are a certain number of years I was going through some difficulty, trauma, however you might want to put it. And going to the library alone as a kid, it was a space I was allowed to go to on my own, and it was also a place that I felt instantly at ease because it was quiet, it was comforting, it was calm. And the more time I spent there, the more the librarians would recognize me and they would come up and talk to me and begin to recommend books to me. So it was really, truly for me like a home away from home, which is why actually in my book there's an entire chapter set in the library where in the middle of these very terrifying events, the three kids in my book hide in the library and they take refuge there. And there's a little twist where it turns out to also being a terrifying experience, but it begins as a place of refuge because that really reflects my experience as a kid.
That's so great. I like one of the things I love about this program is that we do hope that these books find new readers and find a new audience, because librarians are so key to recommending outside, maybe outside your lane. Like, stick to what you love, of course, but they'll always be the one who like sneak something else into your pile and like just give it a try. And I think these books are important for kids to have. And yes, the guide that is put together, it is put together by librarians. So like this is a great resource for everyone using it. Um, without getting too hard into all the like book banning that has been going um, on a broader spectrum. Like what what would you say about like bans and like restricting what stories or dictating what stories a kid should be able to read, or a genre people should be able to read. Like, what is the value of maybe even reading something that makes you uncomfortable or makes you a little bit scared from it being outside of your experience? If that makes sense. I was rambling.
Go ahead, Daka.
I was going to say the danger is that I think books teach empathy. They introduce you to like people and maybe communities and worlds that you alone may not know, like, or, you know, people that are not, you're not familiar with, you don't grow up around. And when you aren't able to have those stories, I think you just, there's the danger of you not broadening your horizons in some kind of way, learning about other people, other cultures, learning even more about yourself and who you are and how you fit into this world. And so I think that's something that I worry about. Because again, growing up, I grew up in this small area and there wasn't a lot of diversity. But when I was reading these books, I was learning about all these other people and, you know, learning their stories and what was important to them. And I think that helped me as a person in general. And when you're not able to get your hands on those books, I think that might kind of hinder you a little bit as a person. My thoughts on it.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, anything that widens your context on this world and on yourself is a good thing, in my opinion. And it's always scary to me when there's groups that are organizing to ban things, because it's always so subjective and like their experience isn't my experience, and like why are they getting a say over what I may or may not see or read? So yeah, I've never been too into the idea of partitioning off information from people and stories, because like Daka said, it's all about us learning about each other on this planet, you know? Like the more we can know about all of our different experiences, like why wouldn't you welcome that?
Yeah, I agree with the points everyone else has made. It's empathy is really just the point. Stories are the way we both express ourselves as writers and both the way we as a society like dream together and tell each other what's important. And I think cutting off any aspect of that is dangerous. And it tends to harm certain marginalized groups more than others. So yeah, it's definitely something I think should be pushed against.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for all of your insights, for your amazing stories. I can't wait for more people to read them. Yeah, we're pretty much at the end. So I'm going to wrap up here with just a few slides, but and you can turn off your cameras if you like. But thank you again for being here today. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording, Summer Scares resources, and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. And don't forget to register for the next 2 Summer Scares webinars. We have one for our YA picks and for our adult books, because horror should be available to all ages. They are happening later this month, so sign up on the Booklist site. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our panelists, Graham, Derrick, and Daka, and to you for helping us celebrate the Summer Scares program.